Believe, but a century ago, PDK, Peachtree DeKalb Airport, was a war city. Believe it or not, there were 1,600 buildings and 46,000 troops there in Chambly. Camp Gordon, not to be confused with Fort Gordon in Augusta, was unique in this state for its ethnic diversity. It had Polish and Greek and Italian and other immigrants who spoke very little English. The 82nd played an important role in the epic offensive that brought an end to World War I. Base Hospital 43 Emory unit at Camp Gordon, with sponsorship from, of course, Emory University, supported a staff of Army volunteer doctors and pharmacists, nurses, including about 71 women. After training here, they left for France in 1918. They treated about 9,000 patients there. Maybe the most famous soldier from World War I that came out of Atlanta, Chambly, that area, was Alvin York, one of the most decorated soldiers of World War I. He trained here, and the film Sergeant York is one of Hollywood's most famous offerings. Gary Cooper, the great actor, won an Academy Award for it. It depicts York's time in Georgia as a turning point. Then you move the clock forward a couple of decades, and in World War II, it was a naval station training flyers. There are some remnants of that time that are still standing. There's a couple of plaques around and some buildings that were still affixed to the camp. But this camp was connected to downtown Atlanta via Peachtree trolley car, something that nobody thinks about when you drive by that airport every day off Claremont.